dropping a link to the webtoons as well.
Okay.
So for everyone that is joining us, be sure to check these links out. I had a chance to read Outlaw's Apprentice, and I loved it. I thought this was a fantastic book. How long have you been working on this series for?
Off and on. I was going through my sketchbooks trying to put everything together for the companion sketchbook that'll be part of the Kickstarter when I do that. And it looks like it's been right around 5 years on the dot that
Wow.
I first started putting together the pieces for it. I've been actively working on it in some form or another for about 4 years, on top of other things. So it's really nice to be in a position where I'm finally able to share the actual comic with the world rather than just preliminary sketches and the vague sense that I have something coming that I'm working on.
So everyone that is watching, be sure to check out those links. We're gonna actually take a moment to look at the Patreon as well. Check out these interiors up close and personal. With that being said, I am good to go. Are you good to go, Chris?
I am good to go, Cody. Thank you so much.
All right, let's begin in 3, 2, 1. Yo, 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 what's up, everybody? Thank you for tuning in to yet again another fantastic episode of Keeping It Geekly. It's your Caper Sarah Cody, and we're hanging out with our new guest, Chris Schweizer. We're here to break down Outlaw's Apprentice and everything in between. Chris, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I am doing great, Cody. It's a beautiful day out. It's starting to get warm again, but not so hot that I'm miserable. So I'm a cold weather person. So it's nice to have spring rather than what we sometimes have here, which is just the jump straight from winter to summer. So anyway, I'm in good shape.
And I'm not going to lie, that background is absolutely beautiful. I love the foliage. I love the books. When we were setting this up, you were in the midst of hanging out in the mountains, doing some martial arts training. And I'm like, man, this guy is awesome. And then I look into you, 3-time Eisner Award nominated cartoonist, Sunday Times best-selling illustrator. You know, you've done work for Scholastic, DC, Netflix, DreamWorks, Nickelodeon. Holy crap. Where did your creative endeavors begin?
A lot of it probably stems from growing up in a pretty creative household. My mom was a violinist, and my dad, he did a lot of things, but his main thing was he was an opera guy. So he ran an opera company. He was a touring opera singer until I was probably about 3, and then wanted to maybe 2, somewhere in that range, and decided that he didn't want to be away from us as much as he had been, or as much as that particular peripatetic performance lifestyle required. And so I grew up on the college campuses where he taught, and in the theaters and things along those lines. He had a lot of books. My granddad was a big comic strip fan, so he was buying comic strip collections as far back as they existed. Well, not as far back as they existed, but from the 50s, 60s onwards. And so we always had that kind of thing around when I was growing up. And so I really was very immersed in that kind of narrative and creative environment from a very early age.
So is that a violin in the background?
It is, yeah.
That is so awesome.
No good at it. My mom gave that to me, and so I basically muddle my way through like mid 19th century fiddle tunes, and it's pretty awful. But eventually, it'll be less awful.
You know, violins are some of the most like beautiful sounding instruments out there. I feel, at least.
Oh,
absolutely. But they seem so difficult to play. Like I can play a guitar, not a problem, but a violin seems like a completely different world.
Yeah, it's tricky. I can get my pitches right, but my tone is always terrible. And a lot of that it's just like anything else. It's like line quality. It's like driving. It's like it's just the act of practicing that makes a difference. And I don't take the time to do so properly. But yeah, it's so pretty. I love the violin. I really like low register instruments. So I'd love to learn how to play the cello. Cello, tuba, things like that. Oh, that's my sweet spot.
So, I mean, practice makes perfect. That goes with artwork as well. Where did that start for you? Was it the Sunday strips that you grew up reading, or what kind of got you into creating your own comics?
I really, I mean, I always drew growing up, and I drew through college. I had a strip in the college newspaper, um, and I ended up with an art degree. I switched around a few times. I was art for a little while. I was theater for a little while. I was English for a little while. But what got me seriously into doing comics was I had. I was doing an Indiana Jones costume for Halloween, so I was using Google image search, and I stumbled across an Indiana Jones themed strip that my now friend Scott Kurtz had done with Player versus Player, which was a web comic that's been going on for a very long time. And I was like, what's a web comic? And so I looked up web. Anyway, I read a bunch of those and I enjoyed them. And I thought, well, what's a web comic? And I looked it up, and I found a site called Webcomics Nation, which was a webcomics hosting site. And in looking through those, some of them were continuing strips, things like that. But Raina Telgemeier, who I think might have been a student at the time, had been posting shorts, just these standalone short comics, in addition to serializing Smile. And I read one of them, and it was 3 pages long. It was about her reading Barefoot Jen when she was in middle school, I think. And it was the first comic that I had ever read that wasn't a continuing strip or a continuing series or a short thing. First short story that I ever read, a self-contained short story,
Mhm.
and also the first autobio type of thing. And I thought, well, isn't that something? I can wrap my head around that in a way that these longer projects, where I would start many things and never finish them. And so I read that, and she posted I did this for one of my mini comics, and I thought, well, what's a mini comic? And then I was thinking about it, and I was like, I bet it's a comic that you print on 8.5 by 11 sheet, both sides, and you fold it over, and that's probably the comic. And I got really excited about this. And that same day, I made my first comic, which was a
That's so
six
cool.
page short little vignette thing, and I was really happy with it. I put it on Webcomics Nation, and people commented on it and were real nice about it. And like the next day, I started a 12-page comic, and a few days later, I started another, and it just steamrolled, and I was hooked, and that was what really got me started in doing comics seriously and wanting to pursue it as a career. About a month into doing that, I knew that's what I wanted to do.
I love how raw that is too. Just that you seen that you wanted to do it and you did it, and that's creating comics in its essence. I feel is just creating it and getting it out there and doing the damn thing. And it's so awesome how that came about. Did you have any formal experience or knowledge of how like a comic lays out, or did you kind of just figure it out as you went?
I kind of figured it out as I went. I had read Understanding Comics at that point, and I
Yeah.
didn't read a lot of comics. And that same year, there was a lot of serendipitous convergence happening at that time. I was just looking at Webcomics Nation on the Wayback Machine, and although you can't access the comics, you can see the table of contents and the dates. And I did not realize that Raina had posted that Beginnings comic uh, within a week of me seeing it. And so if I had looked for web comics a week before, then I might not be a cartoonist. I might not have seen that. It might not have triggered that. Um, uh, so that is pretty wild that happened when it did. Also, a lot of the indie cartoonists that had been serializing books over a long stretch, Seth and Chris Ware and Charles Burns and things like that, all of them, basically all those serializations were finished, and everything was coming out as a graphic novel in the same time. And so the graphic novel section in Barnes and Noble and Borders and things like that suddenly went from being, a couple of Star Wars comics trades and Dark Knight Returns to having this wide breadth of stuff out there. And I always drew kind of cartoony, and uh, I wasn't funny enough to do a strip, like a newspaper strip. And of course, wasn't aware at the time that that was essentially uh, at least at the time where I was coming in, becoming a dead end career wise. There wasn't there weren't the newspapers that were still there. I
Hmm.
do have friends who are still doing newspapers. They're doing very well. I'm not trying to knock newspapers as a venue for comics, but those career opportunities, while always narrow, no longer existed by the time I was doing comics in
Yeah.
the way that they had just a couple of years before. Um, but the big two comics, Spider-Man, Batman, things like that, my style was not aesthetically suited to what they were doing, and so seeing this expansive offering of all of these different aesthetics from all of these different cartoonists was also really heartening for what I was doing. So I was reading everything that I could get my mitts on. I understood how comics worked as a storytelling medium. Like that was something that there was a lot for me to learn, but pacing and shot construction and things like that, like balloon placement to a degree, like that's all stuff that came pretty intuitive just from what I read. And what I read was mostly strips. And I'm of a mind that strips, generally speaking, uh, at least historically, had uh, a greater proportion of good to bad than you
Hmm.
sometimes see in comic books and things like that. Like there's so few of them; they have to be pretty good. So that formally, what I was reading growing up was pretty strong, and so that became part of my storytelling DNA pretty early.
The Sunday strips were something that really got me into comics as well. I lived in the country, in the boons, uh, far away from any comic shop, and every Sunday
Same, yeah.
I waited for them. And thinking about it today, it would probably be so harder to break into Sunday strips than it would be to break into comics, it feels like.
Oh, it absolutely was. I mean, there were only 100-ish strips, and very few of those were widely carried and successful. And so it was a very difficult thing to break into. And there used to be I think, a much higher degree of snobbery inter-industry between comic strip artists as opposed to comic book artists, which was seen as sort of an easier barrier of entry and sort of a lesser art form, just because of the sheer volume that had to be produced and that lack of widespread accessibility. But so yeah, so it would have been tough. And I did submit something when I was in college. I think I submitted my college strip to a couple of places and just got back a form letter. No encouraging, like, keep it up type of stuff. And so I thought, well, that's that. And I kind of gave up on that as a thing. I have historically been very willing to give up, if not getting back some sort of approbation from whatever field I'm looking to get into. And so comics was great because, and I mean, and this isn't to say that I didn't work my tail off to try and,
Hmm.
do my initial stuff, but like I worked really hard to get into grad school. Getting into grad school was you know, made me feel very strongly that I was going in the right direction, things like that. When I pitched my first book, it got picked up. The first book did very well critically, which was very important to me. So all of those steps that might have deterred me from continuing those obstacles were largely not present for me, which was really lucky. And a big part of that is when I came in, the type of stuff that I was doing, like there were a lot of factors that made it, I think, easier for me to get into the market than probably I might have had in if I were working in a different aesthetic or content arena or at a different time or things along those lines. So everything lined up for me really well, and I'm incredibly blessed and lucky that that was the case.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of factors, but you also put a lot of hard work into it as well, and being prepared for that, I feel like is half the battle is in itself.
Yeah, and that's true. I mean, I'm not trying to undersell the degree of effort that I put into it and the attempt at making a good quality. I know that there are a lot of people who do absolutely fantastic work, and for one reason or another, don't find themselves in a
Hmm.
position where that work resonates or where that work catches an audience or is publishable at that particular time. And so I just am very aware at how lucky I am to have for things to have lined up for me. So, so my first series was historical adventure, in tone fairly similar to what I'm doing with Outlaw's Apprentice, but history instead of fantasy. So I'm a big history buff, but I like the the freedom that fantasy allows for
Hmm.
dictating the direction of where things are going to go.
What type of history did you break into with your first series?
The first one was so it actually jumped around a lot. So it was framed by a dad telling his kids about their ancestors inside the
Oh,
book
I
called
love that.
History. So the first book was Golden Age of Pirates. It was set in 1710, I think. The second one was French Foreign Legion in North Africa in the early 20th century. Third one was the Western Frontier Theater of the American Revolution. And so it was so I kind of jumped around because I get really interested in one particular period
Hmm.
or era or region, and I exhaust it as best I'm able, and then I move on to something else. And so this gave me a chance to keep doing that. But what's fun about Outlaw's Apprentice is that a lot of that research that I did, either for existing books or for books that I thought I would do but never ended up doing, either because uh, for any number of reasons, a lot of that is finding its way into this series. So I was very interested in like the Herbert Asbury Gangs of New York book and Lucy Sante's uh, you know decades later follow up Low Life, which delves into like mid 19th century New York tribalism.
Hmm.
I'm really interested in Appalachian labor struggles. I'm really interested in just a lot of different things, and a lot of this stuff I'm sort of able to put into a ball and work on and highlight through the series. And I doubt that it'll, my hope with the history comics was always that, well, this will get somebody excited to go and read the real thing. And I who knows if that ever uh, manifested. But here, if people are interested, they can look. But I don't feel that obligation to try and steer folks towards the source material. Although I certainly will on my Patreon. Like I'll note when
Hmm.
something is borrows from history, like where you can find that history and some good books to read.
That's so cool. Yeah, I'm gonna be honest. I did not know there was a Gangs of New York book. I was a big fan of the movie. I should have figured there
Mhm.
was a book.
Well,
That's I'm gonna check that out. That's
oh, it's
awesome.
great. The book's about 100 years old, and it just is a pretty sensationalist. It's my very favorite nonfiction. Nonfiction in as much as you can trust period
Hmm.
newspapers to be accurate. But it's absolutely wild, and a lot of the stuff that in the movie Leonardo DiCaprio is relating, or that his friend is relating when he's walking around and telling about the different gangs. Like that's essentially what the book is. It's a list of what the different gangs are, like
Oh,
their
that's so cool.
outlandish outfits, like what they're known for. This group, would steal boats and travel up the Hudson and basically do Viking raids on farms and steal a bunch of sheep and come back to New York and sell them. I mean, just thing after thing after thing that were just, it's such a delight to read for me. So yeah, so that one's great, but there's a bunch of stuff, and another big influence on because they're basically going to be traveling across their country over the course of things, and uh, I I really wanted to reflect uh, American culture in this, in a way that I think you sometimes see with European culture or Asian culture in books written by fantasy books written by folks of those regions that you don't always see in America. And so Colin Woodard's American Nations is another really big one, which basically talks about how rather than differentiating America by states, you can differentiate it by region, and each region
Hmm.
has its own specific sort of national culture, born largely of the people that at first uh, settled there in a way that had permanence to now. So not first settled there in the sense of First Nations and Native folks, but settled there in the sense of like which group was able to maintain power in that up through modern day. And so a lot of the places on my little fantasy map um, align to some degree with different regions in the US or North America, to some degree or another. So like there's a part that's kind of like New Orleans, but it's also like built into these canal cliffs and stuff.
Hmm.
But its economic and cultural purpose is the same as what New Orleans was, or it is the same as what New York is, or is the same as what Florida is. And so I can draw on these areas that I know pretty well in order to create sort of this richer culture where everybody's sword fighting.
And the one thing I loved about Outlaw's Apprentice was how detailed it was and lived in the world felt. We're gonna be pulling up some of the interiors on your Patreon. But Outlaw's Apprentice, you said, was a couple years in the making. What drove you to create this story?
Well, originally I always wanted to like fantasy. Theoretically, I should like fantasy. I like armor, I like dragons, I like all that kind of stuff. But there was very little fantasy that ever resonated with me.
Hmm.
Uh Growing up. Like there was always something about it that just didn't exactly click. And I was working on, I guess, yeah, about 5 years ago or so, I started doing these Christmas figures. So I'd pull from holiday folklore around the world, and I would draw up versions of Santa or Krampus or Necht Ruprecht or Dead Mraz or any of these winter holiday figures from around the world. And I really wanted it to have this old world fantasy vibe to it. And so to get into that spirit, I started watching more fantasy movies and started listening to more fantasy fiction audiobooks and reading more stuff and things along those lines, and really trying to find what it is that I liked. And I did find a lot of things that I really liked. And I started to figure out like, well, what is it that I do like about fantasy and what is it that I don't like about fantasy? And that not only helped me figure out my reading stuff, but it also got me excited about doing one myself.
Hmm.
And once I kind of clicked on what I wanted it to be, basically, whatever the next big story I was going to do was going to be of the um, helpful strangers having to travel from town to town and finding trouble and doing their best to right that trouble. That's my favorite genre. I love that in TV, whether that's, TV's Incredible Hulk or Have Gun Will Travel or Wanted Dead or Alive, or there's a William Tell one that I really liked called Crossbow. Like Kung Fu, like that's my favorite genre. I love
Hmm.
that genre, Xena Warrior Princess. Um, and so I really wanted to do something with that, and I was looking at different historical models to do that for a while. Sort of these episodic adventures. And once I kind of clicked on what I wanted my world to be, uh, I got really excited about it, because I think one thing that a lot of fantasy leans into, because there are so many medieval European trappings, is we tend to default to monarchies. and I don't like monarchies.
Yeah.
And so I thought, rather than like what you sometimes have, which is like the shift from monarchy to something, I wanted to delve into the what I thought might be interesting, which would be the shift from a constitutional democracy into something very regressive, where there are systemic things that still hearken to these older centralization of power that are starting to reassert themselves. This is all come up with before everything that's going on. So now, as the news rolls out, I get there was a stretch where I was like, am I going too little with this? Am I going
Hmm.
to, and is it too on the nose? Is it things like that? And the thing is, ideally, none of it is directly analogous to any specific thing happening now, and so hopefully there will be a timelessness to it regardless of what's going on now. And but I think that issue of um rich folks wanting to use that wealth to consolidate power, and in doing so pull the power away from regular folks, I think that's something that has always happened and will continue to always happen. And so I feel like that's fairly timeless. But once I kind of realized that I didn't have to do a historical setting in that sense, I could look more towards the early 19th century US and how it's supposed to be a democracy, but it's not really a democracy. And there are all these different, like, that's where I started to get excited about how everything might come together for it.
I love just how in depth this series is and how much effort and research went into it. The medieval setting I felt was phenomenal too. I really enjoyed our protagonist Otis and is it Erska?
Erska, yeah.
Yeah. And Otis, of course, before he ever drew a blade, was drawing and painting, and I loved how his beginning started as an artist turned into mercenary apprentice.
Yeah, I just that was an early thing. So when I was first coming up with this, my thought was not to have the origins of their outlawry, to just have them perpetually on the run. They're outlaws, and they're out there. And the more that I thought about, and actually I ended up doing what is now the first half of the second book, um, uh, through that lens, which were events that immediately followed the events that happened in the first book. But I was thinking, people, especially if I want to have teen readers, um, there is something nice about just starting in with the traveling people doing what they're doing. But I origins are important, motives are
Hmm.
important, and so I wanted to go back and show like how that stuff came to be. And in doing so, also, you get a better sense as to who the characters are and what matters to them, what's important, what are they willing to risk. Uh, and so yeah, and so I knew that I wanted him to be an apprentice to something before they were outlawed, and that the outlawry, the apprenticing and outlaw came about as a result of his actions,
Yeah, yeah.
um, and would sort of oblige him to help in whatever way he could, and that kind of thing. And so when I was thinking, well, what might be a fun thing to do an apprenticeship with, I thought, stained glass windows would be really nice, and would give me a chance to do something fun, and also tap in a little bit to myself. This is a kid who draws. It's a kid who doesn't think before he jumps into dangerous situations. And let me rephrase that. It's not that he doesn't think. Um, it's that the consequences for engaging matter less to him than the principle of engagement. if that makes sense. Like
Yeah, being a good person, right? If someone
yeah,
needs help, he's going to help somebody.
yeah. And I would do that when I was a kid. If I saw something that I felt was not right, like, part of growing up rural is you grow up violent. It's, and I don't mean violent. It just that you use fighting to solve problems when
Yeah.
you're a kid or when you're a teen in a way that I think does not happen as much in urban environments. Uh, and so so if I saw something that I thought was lousy, I would intervene. And um, uh, sometimes I'd get whooped, and sometimes I wouldn't.
Yeah.
What was great about that kind of thing, though, is that I don't think I ever got in trouble at school for it, because as soon as you say this happened, the teachers or the principal would say, "Oh, okay, well that's fair," and they
Well, they were whipping ass back in school back in the
yeah.
day too.
Oh yeah, I got paddled a few times. So anyway, so so there there's always a lot of you in every character. But there's a lot of Otis in me generally, and so I thought that making him an artist, or at least making him a kid that draws and thinks he's going to draw professionally as an adult, uh, tied in with something I could tap into pretty easily, just from personal experience.
So let's go ahead. Let's take this moment. We're going to pull up the Patreon, check out some of these interiors a little bit up close. I really loved the start to this story. I thought you did a really awesome job with the introduction to Otis and his story. And it left a lot of questions too, where it's like you want to finish the whole book to see where all these characters are and where their journey leads them. I also love the history that is within this world and the lore. I mean, it is such a rich filled world. We have the broken blade.
Yeah, Broken Blade is the name of the first. Sorry, yeah,
which is the sword
itself.
made of God's bronze.
Mhm.
And in the story, I thought it was so funny because it's like, well, we don't know if it's actually broken or not. And Otis is like, it is. I've seen it. Like, and I just love how you have that additional like lore, and it makes this world feel so real.
Well, and one of the things that's really fun for me is so when I write, I tend to I have found that I am better at sort of finding ways to bring things together later than I am at planting seeds deliberately. So I don't necessarily purposefully do uh, foreshadowing stuff. What will happen is as I go, or at least when I'm at my best, I don't necessarily do foreshadowing. What will happen is I will make up things as I go that feel real or that give a sense of verisimilitude or things like that. And as the story goes along, I'll realize a way to bring those elements that were just throwaway lines to suggest the realness and the lived-in quality of the world now become plot specific,
Mm-hmm.
at a later point. And I feel like that is where I'm at my strongest, and that's something that serialization, especially, I'm getting very excited about because I have about the first 350, 375 pages of this.
Wow.
Uh, uh, Tightly roughed out and done. But after that, it's still, it's, where is it going? I know things that I want to be in there. I know things that are going to be important, but a lot of it is finding it as I go. But the sword was, I drew that window where he's breaking the sword. I was like, well, what's a good national myth for these? Because I wanted the series to delve into like how we tell stories about our country and which stories are real, and does it matter if they're real? Are the lies important? Do the lies help shape our identity? Does the truth shape our identity? All these kind of things. And so I was like, well, what would be a good thing, and we'll have it'll be a knight breaking his sword, and that is his George Washington cross chopping down a cherry tree thing. Like that, this sets up whatever system of government they now have. But that image came before the rest of it. But in the doing of it, I'm like, well, what happened to the sword? The sword is here. Is the sword going to become a part of the story? It is. And so a lot of this stuff kind of comes from doing one moment and then thinking about how I can extrapolate that to build a sense of realness in the world and to create story opportunities.
Yeah, and I really, I know you said you really don't do a whole lot of seed planting, but this introduction was so powerful. I felt how, like, and the one thing I really enjoyed was the dialogue in this series. Can you give us a little bit of how you went about creating the dialogue?
A lot of it is how I talk. So when I'm texting people, I sound like an extra in a Coen's Brothers movie. Just because it's a mix of trying to sound too clever and also being a bumpkin, and so a lot of it kind of stems from that. Like this, I I I do my dialogue aloud usually, like I'm writing and I'm thinking about it, and I just want to make sure that the cadence is there, that the that it feels spoken, that there's a rhythm to it, back and forth. Also, and in addition to that, so when I write, I don't write in a script. I write on the page, and so the images and the text and everything is all very malleable when I'm first putting it together, and everything affects everything else. So the dialogue is also shaped by how much room I have in that panel. When I create a block of text, is there now one word that sits alone in a line, and do I want that one word, or can I reshape it, the text, in order to create a more aesthetic block that fits nicely within that balloon? And so all of this kind of is a part of what's there. And so you kind of, I think of it as sort of like an aesthetic version of songwriting. Like you
Hmm.
write your lyrics according to like what your meter is in this particular line. I write my dialogue according to the space and shape that I have in that particular panel a lot of times, and then pacing it out. And it's easier with a webcomic or a graphic novel than it is with a comic book, where you have a set number of pages,
Yeah.
and you have to force a certain amount of dialogue into there. And so I really like the free form aspect of this, to where I can shape it to go. But I read a book that was really helpful to me in terms of thinking about language. Was, geez, I assume it's extremely old. Yeah, probably from the 40s, maybe earlier than that. I've got a three volume book called the American Language by H.L. Mencken. And I first heard about this, I think, from David Milch, who wrote Deadwood, and just talking about how language works in the American syntax. So, like, usually when we're thinking about crafting, language, a lot of times we're thinking about it through the lens of English, as opposed to strictly American English. And when we move to American English, we start to think about like early mid-century folks like Hemingway and things like that, like
Hmm.
condensing it down and stripping it of its uh, ornamentation. But I think that America has a lot of ornamentation that's really fun to roll around in and indulge in. And so when I'm writing, also everybody speaks with a rural accent. Everybody sounds like they're from the Southeast, and that also helps to frame like how I put the dialogue out there, like how it sounds in my head.
I really love your style in these interiors, and I think it's really interesting to hear how you come up with your roughs. Do you prefer to do it digitally over the traditional manner? Because I would imagine you would be going through a ton of paper.
I would be going through a ton of paper. I used to do them traditionally. I used to print out little sheets and do them that way. Now I do them digitally because it allows me to edit so easily. And so I will, although I hand letter on the paper, I do my finals uh, um, in ink. So I
Hmm.
letter on the page, I ink on the page, and then I color it digitally. But I do my roughs digitally because I lay in the text with a font made from my handwriting, so it's pretty close to what the size is going to be. And I do that because I do feel, I mean, like in that middle sequence there, like there isn't a background, but I am still thinking. I mean, usually there's a background. My backgroundless panels or pages are pretty infrequent. Um, and and but I'm thinking very much about how much space do I have for text? How much space do I have for the figures? And so working digitally, I can maximize that space
Hmm.
and take advantage of every square inch that I have without it necessarily feeling um, uh, too packed. Everything's still hopefully very readable. And so I like doing my roughs digitally because it gives me the chance to keep working that dialogue out and changing words and changing spacing until I feel like it's perfect, or as close to perfect as I'm able to make it.
I really, really love the coloring choice for like the beginning part and then into the flashback. I thought that was, it hit so hard.
Well, thank you so much. I really like trying to differentiate every scene color wise, to the point that if you have read the book, hopefully you can flip through and know which scene you're in just by virtue of which colors are happen
Oh,
to be
that's
there
so
at the time.
cool.
And some of that is pulling from, I think when I was in grad school, I happened across the art of book for The Incredibles, and there were color keys for each scene, and that really clicked for me. There's a big fold out in that book. And so this scene is mostly orange with flashes of red. This scene is mostly green with a little bit of blue. And so I try to always think about that when I'm working on a story, especially if I want the scene transition to be really marked, like it is from the prologue to the start of the story itself.
I thought this was really cool. This is right where they're going over the breaking of the sword in the history. Um, and the law, we kind of get a little bit of how everything works in here with the judges. So tell
Yeah,
us a little
trying.
bit about. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, like the tough part was something like this, especially at the start of a series where you're trying to do the necessary world building to have the context for how things are going to be in the story and what matters and what doesn't, is trying to keep it from being boring, um, or being reedy. And so this section here, I went through a gazillion times and just kept cutting. And I've got a buddy who is also a comic guy, Kyle Starks, and he's a great writer, and he absolutely hates world building stuff with a passion. Like he could not care less. He hates history, he hates lore, he hates anything along those lines. And so I would send him stuff and he'd be like, this is where I started to hate it. And so I would know where to basically try to trim and pull back and make it to where it's a little less indulgent, because it's very easy when you've come up with the rules of a world to want to give all of those rules, and make those part of the story. But sometimes they're pertinent and sometimes they're not. And so my hope with this sequence, and especially any of the first few chapters, are all very much setting up what the world is and what the stakes are and why things changing matters. And so trying to find that balance of getting some character moments across in there so that you're engaged in the characters even though they're delivering exposition is really the challenge in that place.
And it's awesome seeing this in color. I think what I got was a like a rough, so it was in black and white, a chunk of it. And it is awesome seeing the colors and just how much it changes, even just like the emotion of the conversation, like the blue and the green balance with the black. I love your coloring.
Well, thank you so very much. And yeah, and I really I wanted it to feel very natural here, so I've got blues and greens and stuff in this scene, a lot of browns. Um, one of the other things that one of the other reasons that I wanted to do fantasy, just from a strictly drawing standpoint, is I did all, speaking of Kyle, a couple of years ago, no, more than a couple of years ago, probably 2019, somewhere like that. I did a series with him called Six Sidekicks of Trigger Keaton for Skybound and Image. And it's like a martial arts murder mystery thing. And it takes place in LA or Hollywood circa 2000, and everything in Hollywood is largely devoid of texture and at sharp right angles. The exterior studios, it's just these white buildings. And I hated that so much. I wanted to be able to suggest perspective with wood grain and all this other stuff. And so finding a setting where I could really have organic shapes and the ground, irregular, meeting the base of the wood and the stone and things along those lines, was really a treat to get to sort of shift into that field. But the color largely reflects the setting and will continue to do so. And so just and I've got a lot of settings planned over the course, so I'm really looking forward to playing with those different environments, and especially playing with how the color works in those different environments.
I really loved Sal's design in this, and this poor dog. You just love this poor dog missing the eyeball, all strangely looking.
I just went over to a local friend's house. There's going to be a prominent goat character that comes into play later. And so a couple years ago, I went over there to sketch some of their goats, and so she just invited me over because they were doing some shearing, and so I went over and got to help catch the sheep and lead them over to the fellow doing the shearing. And they had a cat with one eye that wanders around in the pens, and so I'm sure that probably was a factor thinking about that dog. But I wanted him to look like he had or her to look like she had a rough time out there, but is really sweet. Speaking of coloring, that dog was a little bit warmer and wasn't popping against the ground, so that dog is actually probably far more blue than an actual dog fur could be, but hopefully it doesn't read as unnatural. But I needed it to pop against that brown ground. So there's also that going in and adjusting the colors as much as you can to make sure that things that you need to pop. And sometimes you deviate from what those colors might actually be, just in order to create something that altogether looks the way that it's supposed to look. Even if you take it out of context, this green is actually gold, this gray is actually blue, and you just kind of tweak them until they look right.
And we are going to leave off on the big climax cliffhanger here. Otis makes a pretty big decision that is going to change the course of their life and Erska's life as well. So guys, be sure to head over to Webtoon. We dropped the link right there. You could also go to Patreon and sign up for free, but if you subscribe, you get to see the episodes a week early, if I'm not mistaken.
No, that was originally the plan, and my wife talked me out of it. She was like, do you really want to have to try and keep track of which things you're doing, which pages you're posting at which? And I'm really bad with numbers. I'm bad at keeping track of stuff. And so I felt like that was right. So I may do that down the road, but for now it's all coming together. But I do have pay advantages on the site, but a lot of it I do keep not under a paywall, mostly because I have been poor, and I I do need to make a living with this. I do rely very heavily on reader funding in order to make things happen. But I've had tight times where I wasn't able to do that, and I until these are available at libraries and things along those lines, I want to make sure that stuff, especially process stuff, if you're a student trying to learn, that stuff is as available as I'm able to make it, without a charge. And so there are things that you get for paying on the Patreon, but as a rule, I kind of treat it like a tip jar. Like people who are in a position to throw a little bit of money my way, I certainly value that, and I
Hmm.
need it. But I want it to be a thing where the people who can do it, and the people who can't still are able to, until they can, hopefully someday.
Absolutely. We have our good friend Sierra Bravo over on YouTube. She does look like she had a rough time. And then Erica saying the Patreon is worth it for the mailed prints and paper crafts, even if the comic isn't a week ahead.
Well, thank you both very, very much. I really do appreciate it.
So, Chris, I know this is your first time on the show,
Mhm.
but we always love ending things with a piece of advice
Okay.
and what you're up to outside of creating. So, as a creator who has such a unique style, for the artists out there struggling to find their own, or get started on something close to creating, a style within their means, what would be your biggest piece of advice to help them get started on that journey?
The biggest one for me would be to draw from life as much as possible, but don't worry about making the drawing look like life. Go, whether that, when I say drawing from life, whether that is drawing people looking at photos of people, whether it is, pausing a movie or a show throughout to sketch it, or whether it is going out, going to the bus stop nearby, sketching people there, sketching your friends, sketching all of the chairs in your house, sketching all of the chairs at work. Like all of that stuff will build up a mental catalog for you that is largely absent when you are working strictly out of your head. Um, the thing that's important to keep in mind with that is that building up that mental catalog, you don't have to do a realistic drawing in order to do so. Like you're not trying to do a portrait, you're trying to understand the spatial relationship between eyes and nose and a mouth, or eyes and a forehead, or things along those lines. And the more that you draw people and try to make them look like people, you can do it in your style, you can do it however, the more you'll start to notice these differences that can really help you give a variety to your characters, that can give a variety to your props, things along those lines. But that is, you, in order to have that well from which to draw, you need to fill it from somewhere, and the best way to fill it is going out and finding it elsewhere.
I love that analogy. That is a great analogy and great advice. Thank you so much for that. Now, last but not least, what are you up to outside of creating? What books are you reading? What shows are you watching? What movies are you checking out?
Right now, I am reading through a variety of John Patrick Shanley plays. So I think right now I'm reading Dirty Story and other plays. I like his plays a lot. Whenever I'm in New York for New York Comic Con, I try to stop by the Strand because they have a really big theater section, and I'll just pick up these little plays for cheap, and I'll read those from time to time. I'm usually reading some history book or another. I'm trying to think if I'm reading anything right now. I go through, I cycle through books. Like I'll read half of one, then move to
Hmm.
another, then half it. It's the ADD in full swing. We just, what did we just watch? I feel like we watched something as a family. I can't remember. Movie wise, not a ton lately. Uh, I'm trying to think. I just watched, rewatch for me, Looper with the youngster and my wife who had not seen it. And so they enjoyed that.
Hmm.
But yeah, right now, because uh, basically I usually have a gazillion things that I'm doing, but as I near the end of a project, which I feel like I am with this first book, because I'm tearing through the final pages, everything is written and ready to go, and so I'm doing those. That is taking the majority of my time and interest and enthusiasm right now. So I'm mostly working on that. I did just get back from family get together of the Schweizers in the mountains. We're all mountain people. Schweizer means Swiss. My family's from Switzerland. We celebrate Swiss Day every year and things along those lines. And so my uncles, my grandmother, one of my uncles got me lederhosen for Christmas, and my grandmother saw it and decided that she thought that the uncles should all have the remaining uncles too. My father and one of my uncles have passed, but I've still got three, and she wanted them to have lederhosen, so I found lederhosen for them and made them hats, and I also made my own. So this, used to be a little.
Oh, I love it.
This used to be an Indiana Jones hat that I got at Disney World, but I reblocked it and trimmed the brim and put some things in there, and I made a little pin of the logo of my great grandfather's printing company from 1874 on there. Made similar hats for my uncles, and so we all
can we see that again?
We were all together this last weekend doing that and having a fun time, and I got to lead the sing along for the family. So I'm the oldest of about, I think it's 35ish first cousins, and most of them are married and they've got kids, and so it's a big family.
Can we see that little metal part that you made again?
There, yeah. Here we go. So it's like a little
that's so cool.
Angelic boy and a candle.
That is so cool. I love like I said at the beginning, you are like a jack of all trades, and I love how you're making all that stuff by hand. We have Fat Stingray. Have you ever watched Samurai Jack? It's probably my favorite helpful stranger comes to a town imperiled TV show. I love Samurai Jack.
I have not. I've watched, I think, everything else that Tartakovsky has done, but that one was somehow in a window where I didn't have time to watch shows. It was probably maybe early college, something like that. And so I have not. I've heard only good things, and I love his sense of pacing, so I would love to watch it. It's on my list of watch eventualities.
No, absolutely. So, Chris, once again, thank you so much for swinging by and hanging out and breaking down this awesome series with us. I hope everyone that is watching is having a fantastic day. Be sure to check out those links. Subscribe to Webtoon and Patreon as well, but you could always check out Outlaw's Apprentice for free on his Patreon, so be sure to check out those links. I hope you all have a fantastic day. Most importantly, guys, keep it geekly. All right, give me